Hi, thank you for being here for our training on special education referrals within an RTI and MTSS framework. We apologize in advance if you hear the printer going off. We're recording this in the library. So, that's not the next slide. There you go. So the first thing we're going to talk about is just describing what MTSS is. So I have this great quote just to start off here from Clay Cook. It says, multi-tiered systems of support is like an operating system on a computer that helps organize access based on needs to ensure that each student receives the experiences and support they need to be well, engage fully, and develop and grow. So in our school system, MTSS is not a place where we bring students to get a special ed referral. That may be something that happens in the process, but it's not a guarantee. MTSS is more a process of the school restructuring time and resources to ensure that our teachers have appropriate tools to help students be successful in their learning. And this isn't just for students who are struggling. It might be for students who are, achieving and need maybe more enrichment in the classroom. So then we're going to talk about what is RTI. So the response to intervention framework is based on the notion of increasing the intensity of instruction based on student needs. And in educational literature, RTI is most often referred to as response to intervention, but we ought to think about it as the response to instruction and intervention. It's a combination of both of those things that the students are getting. And this framework just exists to help us organize our schools to ensure that systems are available to guarantee that every student is receiving the time and support they need to be successful. So in simple terms, RTI may be best understood as a verb. To what extent are our students responding to instruction and intervention? To what extent are they RTIing? So when data and other evidence suggest that they're RTIing, we just want to continue to maintain those similar supports. And when data and other evidence suggests that they're not responding to the instruction, then we begin this process of determining what times and supports or interventions may be needed to help them through the MTSS framework.
And minimal growth can show that they are responding. Sometimes we like to see a significant change in their growth, but RTI too, the interventions that we're trying with students, it may be that go slow and see very minimal growth until those components become part of a student's performance level, and then you may see even more growth occur after that. But when they are responding, it's any change in their progress that they're making. So what can we do as educators? Well, the best intervention is prevention. And again, we always talk about that all of our students receive core instruction. And again, when you look at kind of the old RTI model, the triangle, the largest chunk of that triangle is tier 1, and that's core instruction, which again, if you do have students that are receiving additional support, whether it be in special education or tiered support, they're not necessarily pulled out of that tier 1 time frame, as we need to ensure that our students are getting that core instruction from the experts that are in the classroom. Students participate in the rigorous evidence-based instruction, and those are your standards, standard instruction that is again aligned with what the Minnesota Department of Education is also having us, work within our grade level standards for. If after screening the student's performance falls below the age appropriate expectations, part of that process is beginning that conversation with parents. If the student's needing some of that tier instruction, whether it be working with a reading specialist, whether it be small group intervention with some of our tier 2 research-based intervention programs like our PRESS, or if they are working with within our special education department with their case manager, again, it's making sure that those conversations are transparent and fluid, because again, we can't do this alone, and parents are definitely our partners that we need to have them on board and help them with those pieces of support. And again, these interventions are delivered in addition to the core instruction and our tier 2 interventions may begin more specifically, and they will change as the students do begin to show progress. And tier 2 is mostly done with smaller groups. We know that conversations occur within your PLCs, which again is part of the purpose of those PLC meetings, to talk about students, to talk about performance levels, to talk about interventions, things that are working, new ideas maybe to try. And then again, to determine what standards are your must-knows and your nice-to-knows. When you look at our standards-based report card or our standards-based progress report, again, we've identified those must-know standards. It's possible that a large percent of students are at risk simply because of the exposure that they may not have had to the content standards. And again, the attempts to teach what we want students to know, that's a reflective piece too as teachers. If you are typically seeing that less than 50% of your students are performing at the performance level that you have kind of specified, that'd be a great conversation for a whole group teaching. We want to make sure that if we need to re-expose, we are re-exposing and prioritizing. And just kind of keeping kind of like a thumbprint on those students that maybe are at risk, and utilizing all of our resources. So who can definitely define the essential content for second grade students to master? They're grade teachers. That's why our vertical PLC time is also important. And knowing that as we look into next year, there will be identified time for those vertical PLC meetings to happen. I know this year we were able to look at one content standard and really dive into those conversations. And there was a lot of meaning, I think, that came out of them. So again, looking at how can we continue to connect with our next year teachers and work collaboratively to ensure that we're getting those must-knows. All right. When students are not responding to our tier 2 supports, or when schools have found large gaps in some of those foundation skills, tier 3 interventions will be necessary. And again, you can look at it from a class-wide perspective, and then you can look at it from an individual student perspective. And we do use our data from our FAST assessments to help identify tier 3 students that may be good candidates for that more intensive intervention. Providing those scaffolds and accommodations so students can successfully access and demonstrate their mastery of tier 1 standards. And again, those are like your prioritized, your essential learner outcomes within your daily instruction. Just identifying those scaffolds and being able to have those tier supports available, and knowing if accommodations are necessary. And again, scaffolds and accommodations may include finding alternate text that are more and closer to an individual student's reading level, utilizing audio versions of text, utilizing visuals and video representations of the text. And I know that that's an area that we've been able to, I think, dive into over the last few years, knowing that there are a lot of resources that can adapt the text to be closer to the student's reading level. All right.
So then I'll just touch on behavior. I know, working with kids with behaviors can be challenging. And we all know that having behaviors issues in the classroom can interfere with learning because they're not able to focus on that instruction. So we just have to remember that we need to repeatedly be modeling for them appropriate behavior, and then they need to continue to practice those skills while we're giving them feedback in the classroom, and lots of positive reinforcement when we do see those desired behaviors. So if you're needing to work on behavior goals within the academic context, that is completely fine. It provides a meaningful context for those behaviors to be learned and practiced. So then we're going to look at, the response to the intervention and instruction. So questions that we'll be asking is the rate adequate? Have they met their target? Has progress been sustained? Then at that point, we would want to just continue the intervention and see if they're able to maintain that. Sometimes we just need to give them more time. Like Amanda touched on earlier, sometimes progress is happening, but it's slow. And so we just need to continue the intervention and continue to document that. we could also look at the rate. Is it inadequate at this time? Is behavior impacting them or their motivation? And then think about adjusting the duration of the intervention or the frequency of it. Maybe we need to get it more often during the week. So we just consider those targeted interventions or other supports, and we can work within the MTSS team to make sure that your students have access to those different options.
If you have a student that is particularly needing some behavior intervention, it's really important to, when you even look up here too, the target has been met. When we're working with students who may have some challenging behaviors, what is one behavior that we are specifically focusing in on that we want to positively influence or change? So if it's, if the behavior is hands, that they are having trouble with self-control, we're going to focus in on that one specific skill, whether it be with providing some additional visuals, reading some social stories, and then monitoring that one behavior. That's how we'll start to collect data to see if the student will actually respond to the different interventions that we're trying. Okay, so special education eligibility in an RTI model. So RTI entered school practices as a result of IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, because of its superiority over the discrepancy model. And the discrepancy model looks at the difference between IQ or intellectual ability and performance rather than response to intervention. And at just a cautionary reminder that at times some of our struggling students are performing at their ability level, and that's hard to sometimes frame and look at it from that framework versus that they're struggling. They may be actually at their ability level and still performing, which again, every individual student's ability level is going to be individualized. It's going to be just pertinent to that one individual student. Eliminating, when you're looking at special education eligibility again, eliminating IQ tests from the identification process would help shift the emphasis in special education away from the current focus, which is on determining whether students are eligible for services, towards providing students the interventions they need to successfully learn. There is little justification for the use of IQ tests for children with high incidence disabilities, except when mild mental retardation is a consideration, especially given their cost and the lack of evidence indicating that IQ test results are meaningfully to intervention outcomes. And again, this is a piece of excerpt here from the President's Council on Excellence in Special Education. We do know that special education eligibility is a process, and it takes some time. So next part is, when do we move to that evaluation?
Yeah, so I pulled this off of Byron's Mtss plan, which is posted online. It falls under our ZED Mtss plan since we're part of ZED, but it just really breaks down in basic terms the intervention process. So we've really, we went through this at the beginning of our presentation, but I just wanted to show you that what we're doing in MTSS and in the RTI model really does follow our Mtss plan. So it just goes in to show you that students in the 15th percentile or below will be recommended for that Tier 3 intervention, and then it talks about what Tier 3 intervention looks like. There'll be 20 to 30 minutes a week in 1-to-1 groups or 1-to-3 small group instruction. It talks about at the middle school, it'll be a little bit more intensive, and they may get it up to 5 times a week. And then who will provide that intervention? Is that a reading specialist, a classroom teacher, or a highly qualified paraprofessional who's trained and supervised under the direction of the classroom teacher? So Tier 3 intervention is, again, in addition to that Tier 1, the core instruction, the small group interventions, and now we're just adding another layer, which follows that RTI model.
Okay, so our timer is going to go off on our 15 minutes here. So I'm going to actually stop this recording, and you're going to get to watch part 2. So we will reboot here in another minute and continue on.